On May 19, 2016, EgyptAir Flight MS-804 from Paris to Cairo plunged into the sea between Crete and the northern coast of Egypt. Well, now 6 years later, French aviation safety experts have finally revealed that the loss of EgyptAir MS-804 in 2016, which claimed all 66 on board, was caused by a fire sparked by the captain's cigarette. Yes, you heard that right. The fire was sparked by the captain smoking a cigarette in the cockpit just inches away from a leaking, defective oxygen mask. Well, folks, as old Brandon would say, that ain't no joke.
I'm not kidding.
And we're going to talk about it next on Maximus. Greetings, everybody. Maximus here. So the BEA, France's Bureau of Inquiry and Analysis for Civil Aviation Safety, initially suspected that there was a catastrophic mechanical failure that caused the downing of EgyptAir Flight 804. Meanwhile, Egyptian safety officials have refused to publish a report as to the cause of the crash, and instead claimed it was a terrorist attack while still refusing to make public any of their findings. Well, that's not suspicious at all, now is it? In 2018, after studying the black box data, the BEA report concluded the crash had been caused by a fire on board but never specified what caused the fire. But an Italian newspaper recently got a scoop from an anonymous source and saw a copy of the new report, which was sent to a Paris court last month at the request of French judges, in which it concluded the fire was caused by the cigarette of the smoking captain, which ignited oxygen that had leaked from one of the pilot's broken oxygen masks. Paris's Court of Appeals is investigating the incident on grounds of manslaughter because 15 French citizens were on the plane when it went down. The team of experts met 23 times between August 2021 and February 2022 to draft the report after re-examining black box data that had been recovered following the 2016 crash. The 134-page report contends that an oxygen mask in the cockpit of the plane had been leaking shortly before the crash occurred, evidenced by the black box audio recordings which captured the sound of the oxygen hissing from the mask as it sat in the compartment. Okay, so wait a minute. They could hear the oxygen leak hissing on the recording on the black boxes, but the pilots were oblivious to the sound. Okay, moving on. But investigators also found that this same oxygen mask in question had been replaced just 3 days earlier by an EgyptAir maintenance worker, and unbelievably had its release valve set to the emergency pressure position. A significant detail, as this setting forces oxygen to be released at maximum pressure. You know, like a blowtorch. The Airbus Safety Manual specifically states that oxygen leaks may occur when left in the emergency position. Meanwhile, the ashtrays in the airplane's cockpit had to be replaced 2 months prior to the crash due to their, quote, excessive usage, because for some godforsaken reason, EgyptAir still allowed their pilots to smoke in the cockpit in 2016. Sadly, of course, all passengers and crew on board, including 40 Egyptians and 15 French citizens, were lost. Yet even now, 6 years later, Egypt's civil aviation authorities still has not released a report on the accident and has been accused of refusing to cooperate with French authorities. In July of 2018, Egypt's Prosecutor General rejected findings published in France's BEA report, which contended that a cockpit fire had caused the crash, though it did not establish the cause of the fire at the time. However, the report did say the crew could be heard discussing a fire in the cockpit on the voice recorder, and that the plane's automatic ACARS messaging system had flagged smoke on board. The BEA's official statement in 2018 read, "A fire broke out in the cockpit while the plane was at cruising altitude and the fire spread rapidly, causing the loss of control of the aircraft." BEA's report also mentioned the suspicious replacement of the oxygen mask just 3 days prior to the crash, stating that the replacement of this equipment requires careful checking given the dangers of oxygen leaks. A follow-up report in 2019 said there were several incidents concerning the operation of the aircraft which were not reported by the pilots, and thus not followed up by maintenance teams. These faults were not written up when the aircraft was at its home base in Cairo, apparently so that it would not be grounded for repairs. Well, isn't that swell? The investigation revealed that this aircraft should have been subject to checks during its 4 previous flights and should have never taken off from Cairo after a sequence of reoccurring faults which were not reported by successive crews. An attorney for the family of a 26-year-old passenger lost on the flight said that the report showed the crash was due to error and not chance. When warnings are ignored in a systematic manner, this results in a crash, and it becomes impossible to maintain that this is due to chance, he said. Based on this report and the investigations, there should be consequences over the responsibilities of those involved. However, Egypt's Office of Public Prosecution released a statement saying the French findings were unfounded and that its own investigation into the crash was still, quote, ongoing. An official Egyptian probe in 2016 suggested the plane had been bombed, saying traces of explosives have been found on the remains of those killed. But this was widely dismissed. French officials in particular were skeptical of Egypt's insistence the plane was subject to an attack, saying that no traces of explosives were detected and pointing out that no group had claimed responsibility for the attack. Okay, so as I was putting this video together, I remembered how the A320 cockpit is set up, and I wanted to show you just how terrifying this scenario really is. Because if you look at this picture of the A320 cockpit, you can see the box where the oxygen masks are stored. There's a box for the pilot and first officer on either side of the flight deck. Now you can see here where the cockpit ashtrays were installed on the A320 flight deck, and you can see this 8.5 by 11 inch clipboard sitting in there for reference. Also, the oxygen box itself is about the same size, so let's say somewhere around 9 inches in length, give or take. So if the clipboard is about 9 inches wide, then the distance between the ashtray and the leaking oxygen mask set to the emergency pressure position is only about 9 or 10 inches away. You can also see the fire extinguisher is located just below the oxygen box. So what is the emergency pressure position, and why is that important? Well, take a look at this and I'll come back and explain.
The mask regulator provides either a mixture of ambient air and oxygen or pure oxygen by means of the N normal 100% selector. Airbus industry procedure calls for setting the selector always in the 100% position. When the emergency pressure knob is rotated, the mask then is supplied with overpressure permanent flow of oxygen.
So as the BAE report stated, the EgyptAir mechanics who repaired the mask left it in the emergency pressure position, which as the training video states is set to 100% overpressure permanent flow of oxygen. So then if there was a leak in the oxygen mask behind the captain, accidentally set to 100% flow, so much so that they could hear it hissing on the CVR, then that means the cockpit would have been saturated with escaping 100% pure oxygen, creating what is essentially a blowtorch. Then all it takes is one spark from the captain's cigarette to create an uncontrollable inferno. So I'd like to hear from some flight mechanics out there. As we all know, I'm just a YouTube clown making unscientific observations. So please be sure and add your professional wisdom in the comment section below. It's really hard to believe with all we know about the dangers of smoking on aircraft in this day and age that airlines were still letting pilots smoke on the flight deck, as recently as in the case of EgyptAir in 2016. And one of the worst offenders of pilot smoking in the cockpit, China Eastern Airlines, only recently banned the practice in 2019. I'm sure many of you in my age group remember when smoking on planes was no big deal. And even though the US officially banned smoking on planes in 1988, it wasn't until 2000 when the US officially banned smoking on all commercial flights. I'm really looking forward to your comments on this video. Where do you live in the world? Have you seen your captain or pilot smoking on your plane? Maybe where you live this may still be happening. Tell us your stories down below. Well, that's going to wrap it up for now. But before we go, I have some coffee thank yous to take care of. Remy G.O. 12 coffees. Marty Greenfield with 5. Dr. G is back with 20, as well as Miguel Taberna and Dennis. Thank you all. Your fantastic support enables me to invest back into the channel to make the content on Maximus Aviation the best that it can be. And if you too would like to help support the work we do, the links are always in the description. So until next time, don't forget to subscribe if you think I've earned it. And don't forget to like, share, and ring the bell. And remember, leave the rubber on the runway and your troubles on the ground. And I will see you next time in the air. Yeah, this is Maximus.